everybody, welcome back. I want to talk about a few things happening in the market right now. And because we're in an election year, one of my favorite topics to discuss is the impact of your political affiliation on your investing behavior. The way to really succeed as an investor for the long term is to understand the impact of different psychological influences on us as investors. And so maybe it goes without saying that your political affiliation has a huge impact on how you view the world, and that flows through to your investing. Now, should that impact the way that you invest? So I'd like to go over a chart to talk about some of the interesting research and data on that specific topic. Also, I'd like to share a few bits of information that I think are just generally interesting and helpful as an investor. So let's jump into these charts and go from there. All right, in this chart, this is what I was mentioning in the intro about your political affiliation and the impact that has on your general confidence in the U.S. economy and in the stock market. And so it's not readily apparent what is being said on this chart, so I'm going to break it down piece by piece to explain the information we're looking at. So here we're looking at a couple different pieces of information. We're looking at stock market performance over different periods of time. We're also looking at real GDP growth, so in excess of inflation, how much the economy is growing on an inflation-adjusted basis. And then the third piece of information that this chart explores is the general optimism or sentiment of investors broken down by their political affiliation. So here in the U.S., whether they're a Democrat or Republican, or kind of generally lean to one of those parties. So first, let's look at this bottom part of the chart, and here we can see four different kind of presidential regimes within going back to the year 2000. And so here it shows who was in office, right? Who was the president, the dates they were the president in office. We're looking at the returns of the S&P 500 and then also real GDP growth in the economy. Okay, now above this, on this chart, this is showing the sentiment relative level of optimism between Democrats and Republicans. So let's jump into this first time period to kind of give you an idea of what this is saying here. So from 2000 to 2009 here, we have the Bush administration. This is Bush Jr. And you can see over that period of time, the S&P 500 had a total return of negative 4.5% per year, and real GDP growth of about 1.9%. So the economy was growing, but it's actually kind of interesting, just this time frame with the stock market. This happened to be a pretty, perhaps the worst 10 years of investing that we've seen, almost ever in the market. I'm actually not saying that has anything to do with President Bush, but just an interesting observation. Okay, so here we have that. Here we have the actual economic information. Now let's look at general sentiment. Well, this red line, this represents Republicans, and this blue line, this represents Democrats. Now, as you can see, the level of, I don't know what you call it, people that are optimistic versus pessimistic. So generally, you can see there's a pretty large gap here at any given time between the red line and the blue line. So if we just kind of take this midpoint, here you have in the middle of, 2006, about 50% of Republicans have a positive outlook on the economy and things generally. And for Democrats at the same period of time, 12, 10, 15%, something like that. Now, interesting, as we go into the election day, and there's a change in the political environment. Now we go from Republicans being in office to a Democrat being in office, and you can see that immediately we have a switch from in terms of optimism. You can see that generally, kind of overall, Republicans and Democrats are, relative to this time frame, they're less optimistic. But you can see that immediately once the political party switches, Democrats are, relative to Republicans, more optimistic about the future. Now, as you can tell, as you might notice, that also seems to be independent of what's actually happening in the economy or in the stock market. So over this period of time, this 8-year period of time, the stock market experienced a 16.3% rate of return per year with real GDP growth of about 2.2%. And so as you can see over the Obama administration, as time went on, you have kind of a general outlook on the market and on the economy is improving, but still over the entire period of time, Republicans consistently seeing things in a less rosy manner compared to Democrats. Now, this is probably the funniest one, or the most interesting one, perhaps, is over the Trump presidency. So from 17 to 21, you can see very interesting. So Republicans, here we are. Republicans, how they're feeling about the economy. Democrats, how they're feeling about the economy. As soon as Election Day hits, for Republicans, there is just this surge in optimism, right? You go from, I don't know, let's call it 20%. 20% of Republicans feeling optimistic about the general economic conditions to something like 80+%. I think probably the highest point on this chart overall. Interesting, Democrats, their level of optimism is kind of just chugging along here. But you can see there's a massive swing in that relative optimism of the economy. Now, how does that actually track with the economic numbers over that given period of time? Well, real GDP growth and stock market returns, you can see they're actually very similar to the Obama years. 16.3 versus 16% per year in the U.S. stock market, and then 2.2% real GDP growth versus 1.8% real GDP growth. They're almost identical, right? One is larger than the other, but these are, I would say they're just about the same, and they're almost identical. But you can see that although the economic data is almost identical, the relative sentiment is what is quite different. Now you can see that we come into 2020. Here's where we enter COVID, and you can see there's a drop overall, Republicans and Democrats dropping in their overall outlook for the future with the economy, but still that political affiliation seems to persist, where the current party in office has an overall more optimistic outlook. Okay, now, as you can tell, as we go on looking at the end of this chart, as soon as the election happens, there's an immediate flip over, and now Democrats, as President Biden is in office, you can see there's if you were to, Democrats versus Republicans, Democrats are generally more optimistic about the outlook for the market and for the economy relative to Republicans. Also, interestingly enough, if we just look at the numbers of the stock market return per year so far, as well as real GDP growth, still strong numbers. In fact, strongest GDP growth, real GDP growth that we've seen over this entire period of time. And then, if the market we've seen over the last 100 years, I don't know, about 10-ish% per year in terms of return. And so this is kind of falling in right in line with the long run average. If I didn't tell you who the president was, we just said, hey, does 10% per year in the market seem pretty good? I think about anybody would say, yeah, it sounds pretty good. So I guess the whole point of this chart is that it really highlights this, the impact that politics have on the way that we feel about investing, the way we feel about the economy. And so I think the takeaway for me and for everybody is that even though you might have a very strong, strong convictions politically towards one party or another, it's that your political affiliation and should have very, very little impact on how you invest, because the two, there's not a strong correlation between them, between who's in office and how the economy and how the market are actually doing. So anyway, as we're in election year, try to keep that in mind and keep focused on your long-term goals.